So good morning and welcome to our session on the link between science communication and research impact. So impact is actually a really curious term to define in research, but it can be broadly sort of described as using science to make a difference of some sort. I think that's about the best way to probably try and describe it. There are many ways researchers can sort of communicate their work to a wider audience in order to sort of develop their own personal research impact and that of their work as well. But we recognize that sometimes this can be a little bit scary, jumping into the deep end and actually talking to people when we know that scientists aren't sometimes very people-friendly. So we've assembled here like a group of awesome people to share their experiences in this domain, and we want to explore some of the ways that researchers and others can effectively communicate their work and in the process help to make a real difference to their audiences, to science, and to themselves. So on my left, we've got Ben Johnson. Ben is a senior policy advisor at HEFCE, the Higher Education Funding Council of England, and a member of the G7 expert group on open science. He's also the person in charge of creating Research England, which is the newest and largest research council in the new UK Research and Innovation Superfunder. So if anyone has any complaints about that, then yeah. And
thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I thought I'd continue with the superhero theme, actually, because in a way, the UK has superpowers in that we are really small and also really big at the same time. We have less than 1% of the world's population with just 4% of the world's researchers, but we produce a phenomenal amount of impact from the research that we do. Out of the top layer of most highly cited papers, 1 in 6 is generated in the UK. And of those, over 90% come from university research. So we are really, really amazing in the UK at research. And governments think so too. They invest trillions of pounds over decades into the research system. For every pound that's put in, you get 20p back year on year forever. It generates a huge amount of money, and I think that's amazing. I think we have superpowers in the UK, and I think it's important to remember that we're really good at doing research. And there's demand out there for it too in the wider society. You know, we've got businesses linking up with researchers and universities to generate huge amounts of economic impact. You know, for every pound that we stick into universities to help them work with businesses, we generate another £10 back. You know, this is great stuff. And I think it's really important. The government's putting in more money. You know, we've got more money going in over the next few years through an industrial strategy, which will be announced next week. It's going to generate the biggest investment in research that we've seen for decades, and it's more money for researchers like you to take advantage of, really, which I think is fantastic. But there is a downside. I think overall, trust in science seems to be waning a bit. You know, we live in a post-truth era now. We've had enough of experts, people say. No, people are doubting the science now around really, really critically important things, public health issues like vaccination and climate change, you know, things that are really affecting everyone's lives. And our universities are being dragged through the mud with, you know, you've seen the articles probably over the summer, fat cartel vice-chancellors, you know, researchers lazy, they got 4 months off over the summer, they don't do any work, they don't teach their students. This is problematic for us because it means that we've, you know, in that context, I don't think it's sufficient really for researchers to just rest on their laurels and kind of do some of the things that they've always felt that they want to do, i.e., you know, kind of publishing in subscription journals and just kind of locking themselves away and kind of retreating into the comfort zone. I think within that context, we need to be doing more as a research community to make those connections with each other and the wider world. So, you know, from a research funder perspective, we are not expecting the science to be any different. It's already amazing, but I think we probably are expecting scientists to behave slightly differently. And institutions, research institutions, institutes, universities to support them in doing that. And I think there's 3 aspects to that, really. Firstly is you must communicate your research, and you must do that openly. At the very least, get your research into a repository. This is the basic stuff, right? Get it into the repository. ideally be publishing it open access. Let's get it out there immediately on publication. Let's get open licenses attached to it so people can make use of it. Let's get the data out there so people can make use of it and interrogate it, and we can get real benefit from the research data that's being generated. Let's get your methodologies open so people can really challenge it and critique it and learn from each other in what you're doing. That, I think, will help to build up trust. Work with others and work with your partners that are out there to generate impact, make those connections. There are lots of tools available for doing that. You've got your universities, you've got tech transfer offices, you've got new tools like the Confer tool, which was launched last week, which is about explicitly trying to make connections between people who are looking for research collaborations and businesses, and make use of that. Make sure your information is on there so that people can find you and link up with you. And above all, demonstrate your impact. There's loads of amazing stuff going on. Make sure that you write it down and that you can articulate the benefits of your work. That's really, really critical. We're not suggesting that you need to only do research which has an impact on the wider economy and society. We don't live in that sort of world. But we do want to hear about the amazing impacts that are going on. And it doesn't always have to be an economic impact. There are phenomenal social and cultural impacts from research, and we need to get those captured because those are the things that win the arguments with the politicians. And this is why we've been very good at this. We've got 6,975 case studies of how amazing we've been at generating impact. We're going to need to continue to doing that, and I think that's absolutely critical. But I think above all, as researchers, be brave in this. Challenge the convention that you need to just be publishing in these places to further your own career. Let's get out there and generate the impact and keep the system going, really. And your funders will support you in doing that. And let's all be superheroes. Thanks.
Thanks for that, Ben. That was epic. Next up, we've got Monica Hoyas-Flight. So Monica is the Research, Communications and Admin Manager at the Roslin Institute at the University of Edinburgh. And she's also an epic freelance science writer. So hopefully we'll hear a bit about that.
Thank you, John and Laura, for inviting me to be on this panel. So I would just like to start introducing a little bit about myself, my background and my experience in my current role, which is helping researchers engage with different audiences and how, as an institution, we're going about capturing the impact of our research. So I trained as a neuroscientist, but after my PhD, I realized the lab wasn't the future for me, so I took up an internship position at what was then the web publishing department at Nature. I worked with you in there, it's about 11 years ago now. And from there in 2007, I joined Nature Reviews. I was senior editor for Nature Reviews Neuroscience, Nature Reviews Drug Discovery, and in that role I would commission reviews, edit the pieces that came in, and manage the peer review process. And I have to say, academics were always more than happy to oblige with all my requests. In 2013, I moved to the University of Edinburgh, and I've held several science communication posts. So I'm seeing the other side of things, and I see all the demands that are on their time. So I've been public engagement and outreach coordinator for the School of Chemistry, coordinator for the National Institutes of Bioscience. So this was a new partnership of the 8 BBSRC-funded institutes that was launched in 2015, and now I manage the communication of research at the Roslin Institute. So I think just the fact that all these positions or jobs exist reflects how important it is for organizations to communicate the research that's going on within them, not only to other researchers and their students, but also to policymakers, to industry, to school children, to the general public. So I manage a small team, and our ultimate goal is to communicate the impact of the research at the Roslin Institute. So we focus on communicating the impact the work has on society, on the economy, on advancing knowledge. By doing so, we raise the profile of the institution, of our researchers, which in turn attracts further funding, collaborations with industry, more staff and students. So we constantly encourage and support our researchers to engage with different audiences, and we do this through several ways. So we've got an internal newsletter which highlights opportunities, not only funding opportunities, but any forthcoming events or awards they might be eligible for, possibilities to feed into government inquiries or consultations. We also have a year-round program of public engagement activities. So we've got regular slots at the Edinburgh International Science Festival, the Royal Highland Show, Campus Open Day. And we provide training for our researchers, whether that's in-house or we get external people to come in. We also support them in carrying out these activities with producing copy or graphics, if they've got an event, helping out with the logistics. So at the Roslin Institute, there are over 70 research groups. So for our external communications, it's essential that we know what's going on. And with that aim, we've got a press gang, or a group of Roslin reporters, as I prefer to call them, that alert us to things that we might not be picking up. And also, to comply with the next REF's open access requirements, we're encouraging researchers to tell us when their papers have been accepted. So this gives us a heads up and a chance to consider whether we want to issue a press release about them or cover them on our website. And I'd like to finish off just by saying a little bit about how we're capturing all this activity, because ultimately this is going to be the basis of our impact cases for the next REF. So at the University of Edinburgh, we rely on the current research information system, PURE. I don't know if any of you have come across this, but researchers are requested to upload some profile information and information about their research outputs and activities. So this would be our institutional repository. It's linked to our external-facing website, so basically we hope that acts as an incentive for them to keep it up to date. Which is not always the case. And we've also got an impact committee. So this promotes, develops, and coordinates the impacts activities across the institute. It's led by an academic chair, and we try to get everyone involved, as many people as possible. So we've got representatives from the different institute strategic programs. We've got a PhD representative, postdoc representative, representatives from Edinburgh Innovation, which manage our relationships with industry, and the communications and marketing team. So we carried out a REF readiness exercise last year to start to look at potential cases that we will aim to build up. So our next step will be to establish action plans and some form of traffic light system to see how we're progressing against them. And basically, I'm really interested in hearing how other organizations are going about capturing impact, and from researchers, how they think support staff like myself can best help them to carry out their science communication activities. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you for that, Monica. Next up, we've got Ewan Adey. So for those who don't know Ewan already, he's the founder of Altmetric, which is one of the digital science portfolio companies. Apparently, I was told just before this that you eat one donut every day, so religiously. I was wondering if you could tell us what the Altmetric score for that was, and then tell us some things about what you're doing. Apparently it is, yeah.
So that is untrue. That's a terrible lie.
Laura,
Actually,
where are you?
I'll let you into a secret, which is that I actually don't like donuts, even though the logo of our company is donut. So there you go. Yeah, I like bagels. Anyway, yeah. So thank you very much. So as John said, I work at a company called Altmetric. So just to give some context to what I'm going to say in a minute, what we try and do is we collect all this data around research outputs online. So what are people saying about articles or clinical trials or data sets or whatever, and that could be on places like social media. So this is anywhere online. So it could be things like Twitter, Facebook, Google+, that kind of thing. But it could also be anywhere else online that's mentioning books or using articles. So things like syllabi online, or policy documents. If you think about documents from NICE here, so the evidence that the NHS is using to determine how to, the guidelines for treating patients in the UK. So all of these places, refer to research in some way, and there's different aspects to it. On Twitter, people are sharing research for different reasons than a NICE guideline is citing research, right? Okay, so I really have kind of 2 points I wanted to get across and be interested in discussing. So the first is that we should be aware of the differences between, or the different aspects of research. So if you think about what do you want from a paper, one way of looking at it is to go, okay, well, first of all, we want quality, right? That's the bedrock of everything we do. So we want a paper to be reproducible. Quality is a very subjective term. It's very difficult to measure. In fact, it's probably impossible to measure quantitatively. And that's because you can get things like, well, what about how much of a breakthrough a paper is? Is that related to the quality of it? You know, versus something that's more of a review type thing or a small incremental advance. But irrelevant of that, you know, the fact is you want it to be good science or good research more broadly. The second thing is attention. So once you've got a good piece of work, at least one person needs to read it and find out about it. Otherwise, what's the point, right? You've not done a very good job. And that comes back to, I think, what previous people have said before, which is why it's so important to communicate your work. It's the bedrock of a lot of other things, but it's not necessarily the end that you want in itself. That's the third kind of aspect of research, I think, which is this impact part. So we change something about the world. That sounds very grandiose when I say it like that, but actually impact means a lot of different things, just like quality. It's very subjective. I mean, a lot of different things to different people. Certainly, kind of the impact we're talking about in terms of the ref is different to the impact of just, you know, persuading somebody to cite your paper and, you know, kind of standing on the shoulder of giants, right? One is a lot easier than the other one. And those three things are interlinked. So, you know, you said, well, quality has got to be the bedrock of everything. Without attention, nobody's going to see it. So you certainly can't have impact without it. But they're also different. So you can have papers that are not necessarily correlated. So you can have papers that get a lot of attention, but don't have any impact at all. So if you think about, we run this top 100 thing every year, this list of the papers that have gotten the most attention. And of them, you know, between 5 and 10% will be papers in there for a reason not related to the impact they're going to have in the world or because they're top quality papers, but because there's something funny about them, for example. So it could be they've got a particularly good figure in them, which is pandas falling off cliffs, if you've seen that one. It could be they've got a copy editing mistake in them, which is cite the crappy Gabor paper, if you know that story. These are all good things to look up. They're quite good fun. And equally, things can have impact without quality. So if you think about something like Andrew Wakefield's MMR stuff in the Lancet, right? That had an impact that, first of all, is based on science that, you know, is now been, I can't remember if they've actually retracted it or not, but certainly bad science, if you like. And furthermore, the impact is negative as well as positive. So it's not, you know, quite as simple as saying, you know, communicate your research more and you're going to have more impact. It's a bit more nuanced than that. Which brings me to the second thing, which is that you should have a plan. I think what we see is like knowing that there's all these different kinds of impact across all these different kind of communication platforms. It's helpful as a researcher to kind of have an idea of what you're going for and then to focus on that. And there's some very good blog posts on in places like the LSE Impact blog about, for example, how policymakers find research. So if you're trying to have more of a policy impact, maybe you should be taking those steps rather than kind of more public engagement type traditional science communication approach, which is, you know, perfectly reasonable as well, perfectly good impact. The other good thing about having a plan is, and maybe Ben can correct me if I'm wrong, but actually a lot of the time, you know, if you're filling in a grant application or you're trying to talk about, you know, how are you going to have this impact, it's not necessarily that you're going to be scored if you fail to meet the plan and your work fails to have this tremendous impact, you know, you're going to have some money clawed back or something. It's more that people want you to, well, funders and institutions especially want you to think about it. So it's just thinking about, can this research have impact? What should I do if I do think that's true to get out there, and how can I make it happen? That's the important part. I'll leave it there.
Awesome, thanks, Ewan. So finally, before we open up to Q&A, we've got Elodie Chabrol. So Elodie is an ex-neuroscientist at UCL and the current director of Pine of Science International, which if you haven't been to yet, go and check out. The last time we met was actually in a pub here in London where she doped up an entire audience on oxytocin just for science, if you remember that.
Yeah,
oxytocin
I remember.
being the love drug. So over to you.
Thank you. So yeah, I'm working for Pint of Science. So basically, our goal is to make researcher meet the public, because I'm going to focus on the public, really, public engagement. Because I think it's really, as Ben said, sometimes researchers have a bad image. The public really, doesn't really know what a real researcher is, and we can be accessible, we can really share our science. So I think it's really important we can share our science to the public really effectively. As our superhero said, science is finished only when it's communicated, right? So I think it's really, really important. The thing is, for having seen that so often, is that a lot of scientists are really scared to talk to the public. That's really something I've seen. And my point is, talking to the public is not scary. It doesn't have to be scary. So obviously I'm going to say, if you want to do public engagement, go and do some Pint of Science talk, because it's awesome. It's basically it's basically talks in pubs. So it's really relaxed. You talk to the public, you explain your research, they can ask questions. It's great. But if you're not a live talk person, don't force yourself to do that. You have lots of ways where you can meet the public, you can talk to the public without having to meet them in real life. And you can do it step by step. For example, you can start with Twitter, which is a really great place. Before you had to be really short, now you can be actually a bit longer. So you can have your Twitter account, and you have also great accounts that are, I think it's Real Scientist. I know lots of French one, but English one, you have Real Scientist, which is an account that gives someone for a week. You have one scientist for a week that can tweet and explain what they are doing. So every week, one different scientist. And it's great because it's basically helping you starting to talk to the public, really short sentences, so you don't have to be super good writer to do that. You can just explain what you're doing, take pictures of your experiments and everything. That's a good step to share science with the public. It's helping your Twitter account as well to grow with followers and everything. Then you can write some blogs as well. You don't have to have a blog. You can always, I know I've written for Digital Science. I know Digital Science has guest posts, so you can always try. It's really good. You have really lots of ways, and obviously you have the live talks that are quite cool, but you don't have to start with that. You can always come to that at one point when you feel like it. But I think it's really, really important to communicate your science to the public. It's important for you, and now it's getting more and more important because in grants, they are asking for it now. It's quite new. I think it's been starting over the last 5 years. But before, they were always asking the project, your resume, how you were able to do your project. But now they are asking for how are you going to talk about your research to the public? What's public engagement are you going to do? And more researchers are getting really confused because honestly, it's something that we're not used to do. Public engagement, it's quite new. So they are confused and they are looking for stuff. And you have lots of ways, so use them and start with what you feel like doing. Don't be scared. That's it.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Elodie. I think, we've got like 15 minutes left of the session, which is pretty cool. So we're going to open up to Q&A. I just sort of wanted to stimulate the discussion to begin with. So everyone in this room is probably thinking to some degree, like, is science communication for me? Like, what are the incentives for me to go ahead and try and increase my impact through science communication? And we have a funder, an institutional company perspective, and a pint perspective. I was wondering if you could all just offer a couple of comments on what you think the main incentives are for researchers to go ahead and, communicate more widely with different audiences.
Wow, that's a deep question, isn't it? I think the truth is that a lot of the incentives conflict with one another, and researchers find themselves with not very much time, with a hell of a lot of demands on that time. And I think the challenge there is that if this is felt as a bolt-on to existing activity, then it's difficult for them to justify it. And so I think that what we need a better articulation of what the benefits are to the research process of communicating better, of more public engagement, of open research. We are getting there. There are things out there that demonstrate, say, the impact, the positive impact on citations of making research openly available, for instance, but also really amazing sort of case study stories of people when they go out and talk to people, other researchers in different research institutions, organizations, or even members of the public or businesses or whoever. They're finding new opportunities for collaboration. I think that's the stuff that needs to become embedded into behavior, so it no longer feels like a bolt-on. And I think it's up to all of the other players in the system to make sure that the barriers to that are reduced, and that we put the right mix of sticks and carrots in there. So from a research funder perspective, I'd probably say the ref has a pretty big impact here. You know, having the next ref will have 25% of the money will be attached to the impact element of the ref. You know, that's going to change behaviour. That's going to create lots of activity in universities. I'm sure Monica can talk about this as well, to ensure that is captured. But it changes the kind of culture around incentives as well. So, but it is a complex picture, and I think that is the challenge.
Yeah, no, I would say, so the Roslin Institute is strategically funded by the BBSRC, and they've certainly been encouraging BBSRC-funded researchers to engage with the public. They offer help with conducting public engagement activities and public dialogues. So I think the culture change is happening. The fact that now you have to justify your pathways to impact, and not only research council grants, but also other ones like the Wellcome Trust, is getting people to think about it earlier on. I think it's still maybe early on, so people will write all this stuff on their grants and then forget about it because they've got the actual research to get done, which is why I think having support staff in the institution really helps. And we do encourage them to actually ask for money to do this, because it makes it feel as less of a bolt-on, or, okay, now I've got to produce all these workshops. At least if you've got money, which BBSRC is happy to include in the grants, then we can actually do something much more professional as well, and think about it better. And the last thing I want to say as well is, at the Institute, part of the annual review process includes a discussion on what impact activities you've been involved in. So it also counts towards promotion in that sense. So that, I think, is a really good incentive for people.
Thanks. So I suppose what I would say, sorry, this is what happens when you have to think of the answer before you speak. So I was just thinking, actually, there's a separate question, which is maybe a whole other discussion, which is, should you have to care about science communication, as a scientist? If you don't enjoy doing it, why are we making you do it instead of research? And that's this whole other thing. And that's, it's partly because we don't live in the perfect world where, all the research is discoverable in the right way, and, the best research for whatever value best rises to the top and all this kind of stuff. So practically speaking, in the real world, I think what it comes down to is nobody else is going to do it for you. Either you are going to communicate your research and make sure it has the effect, the impact that you think it should do, or nobody is, sadly, unless you're published in a journal with a lot of different support, or you have a very proactive kind of communication officer helping you. A lot of it's going to come down to you. And of course, there's lots of different support services there for you to take, and lots of advice and things online, but you do need to take a little bit of initiative, I think, and reach out and let people know that you're going to have a paper published, read blogs, do things like Pint of Science. So yeah, that sounds like a bit of a downer. I didn't mean it to be.
No, but it's true that you're the first fan of your work. Because if you do it, let's face it, research is quite difficult. You face a lot of failures and everything. So when you arrive to the point where you actually have something to show, you're quite proud of it. So you're the first one that wants to share it. So I think the first thing to do communication or impact or anything is to be proud of your work and to be happy. The thing is, in labs, it's getting better, but it's quite difficult to actually have time and to manage to convince your boss that impact is part of your job. For them, it's something that you should do on the side, but the hard experiments are the thing that you should do. You should be on the bench every day or doing your research, and everything that is related to impact and communication is something that you do on your free time because it's, something you should enjoy. So I think the mentality has to change about that, but yeah.
Okay, so people on the floor. The chap in the white t-shirt. Should we go for him first?
I just wanted to
Oh, wait for the mic. We've got a mic coming towards you.
I just wanted to raise. Is it on?
We can hear you.
Yeah, right. Just wanted to raise a point about the publishing side of things. We talk about making publishing open access, but a paywall isn't necessarily the only barrier for the public to access research. Often, so the point I want to make is about language used in articles, and often there is an excessive use of jargon. And I just wonder whether this is something we should be thinking about as scientists in publishing, whether we should be trying to simplify the language we use so it's more appropriate for lay individuals, or whether that's something for a separate scientific engagement activity to achieve.
Yeah, I think in some ways it is separate. You don't want to necessarily dumb down the way that scientists, researchers talk to each other. They use very specific technical language for a reason, and you don't want to remove the precision from the way that researchers talk to each other, because that would potentially be very damaging for quality. But I think there's the interesting stuff around, there's lots of discussion around lay abstracts, and I think that is extra work, but I think it's very valuable. Speaking as a layperson myself, I'm not coming from the research background, but I am a big consumer of research, particularly around science policy and the impact agenda and things. And there is a learning curve on that stuff, which would have been a much shallower learning curve for me starting out if the stuff had been more accessible, with key points in lay language laid out for people out there who need to get right to the heart of it. And I think that's where publishers probably can play a role, but I think also researchers themselves. There's lots of things around that. I saw this really interesting thing around. There's that Twitter hashtag, isn't there? Tweet your PhD. Can you get it into 140 characters? Well, now 280 now. It's probably slightly easier now, isn't it? With 280.
It's not very much of a challenge anymore.
But that sort of thing, it encourages a way of thinking about your work where you sort of help you overcome that challenge of being at a party and someone asks what you do and you don't have a way of explaining it. We probably all need to get a bit better at that.
Yeah, so this is a really key point. We actually had, I think, a 2-day discussion about this at one of the earlier spot-ons, and it's the difference between access and accessibility, right? So as scientists, we're trained to write in a specific way because our primary method of communication is journal articles, which is designed to communicate with researchers. So you can't decouple that. But what you can do is bolt things on. And what a lot of journals are doing now are actually enforcing researchers to write these author summaries of their works. What is the main significance of your research? What did you do? And there's nothing stopping researchers from doing this, for example, on their own websites. So start a blog. It's free. There's nothing stopping researchers from making their own work more accessible, apart from simply not caring. And I don't think anyone in this room doesn't care. So, Shanahan, want to go? Yeah, I know.
Cheers. I assume everyone can hear me. My question's quite simple, but all of this we've been talking about science communication, and it does become quite self-fulfilling. The more you tweet, the more followers you have, the more your articles get picked up. Very similar for citations. My question's quite simple. Is impact ever going to be a reliable measure in any way, considering how autocorrelated it is? And does that actually matter anyway?
I thought you said a simple question.
Simple question, possibly a difficult answer.
I don't know if anyone... Do you think you can... Yeah, you might be.
So I didn't quite understand the question. You said, so science communication, people are talking more, but then...
For example, for example, Dan wrote a paper showing that the more citations a journal gets, the higher its impact factor is. Therefore, the more people cite it. So it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. So the more you tweet, the more impact you generate.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's how you become a superhero.
Sorry, I mean, well, to me, we come back to the kind of framework for understanding. Are we talking about quality, impact, or attention? And really, the attention part is what we're talking about there, right? Impact it's not to do with how many people saw it. Is anyone who did see it doing something interesting with it, which is much harder to get out with metrics and things. That's when it comes down to case studies and interviewing people and following these big trails, which is why universities are paying people to to go out and talk to people rather than just relying on systems with numbers. But it's a very good point because it illustrates the kind of trap, which is that it's very easy for everyone to kind of use metrics as a proxy for that kind of stuff. And for good reason, because it's so difficult to collect the data manually. But so the short sum up is, yes, I think impact is still a valuable thing to kind of to track and watch, and it is correlated. But the trick is, not to get too preoccupied with the kind of proxy numbers around it.
I also think that a lot of these impacts on the wider economy and society are very qualitative. They're very subjective. It's not linear, and it's hard to sort of measure. I think a drug saves 10,000 lives, or you make a policy intervention that stops a war. Are those two things? Are they comparable? I saw this incredible video that was about brain-computer interfaces, which was some research happening at the University of Plymouth, and it enabled a woman who was paraplegic but who was formerly a musician to be able to control a computer to generate music for another violinist to play, and that had a massive impact on her quality of life as a disabled person. She had an accident and lost the use of her arms and legs, and that was something you watch the video and it has a profound effect on you. It's very emotional. I'll try and tweet it out later so you can all watch it. That's very, very difficult to say. Whether that is a lesser or a greater impact than anything else that is generated from research. So as I say, it's all very subjective and very kind of qualitative. But I would say that the more people are doing, the more impact they can generate. That's definitely true.
Yeah. Your pick.
Hi. So many scientists will want to, understandably, publicise their work, but often the public aren't really that interested unless it's going to impact them right now, if not in the not-too-distant future. And unfortunately, that can mean sometimes that results can be sensationalised, and I just wondered your thoughts on that, because obviously it gets people excited about science and talking about it, but on the flip side, it can also mean that the public don't trust scientists very much because the findings have been over-egged. So I wondered whether you think it's an acceptable practice.
Who wants to take this one? The downside of sensationalism. The downside to sensationalism, I think. It's a toughie.
We don't want to... basically, we are now... I feel research has become part of the elite now, and we are struggling with issues of trust. So I would say journalists and the media in general are more careful about how they portray research. We work with the Science Media Centre, so they get the researchers to provide briefings to the press, so there's a deeper understanding of the research and they don't just go for the big headlines. However, inevitably there will be press, particular sectors of the press that will just aim to sell more newspapers. But I think researchers have to take the responsibility of communicating what the potential of their work without over-egging it, and it's all about gaining trust with the public they're engaging with as well.
Sorry, a quick word. I think trust comes with when you have a direct interaction between the researcher and the public, because sometimes they are not trusting newspapers or stuff like that. But when you actually meet a scientist and it actually explains to you what he's doing, I think you build trust because you get the information directly. So, yeah.
I mean, like, in this case, I think the issue is making sure that researchers and journalists actually engage with each other. So a journalist, they want to sensationalize work because that's how they get clicks to their website and that's how they get paid. A researcher wants to communicate effective, integral science, someone with integrity, right? Because that's what they care about. Combining the two of them can be very effective. Having researchers who are trained as journalists, for example, to actually be able to communicate messages very effectively, but without sensationalizing, is extremely powerful. And in the same way, having journalists with a scientific background, not necessarily a PhD or something, but an understanding of how the scientific process works, can really help to make an effective medium for carrying scientific information forward. Saying that the public aren't really interested in stuff which isn't relevant to them? I don't know. Have you asked 7 billion people? I like to think that the public is ginormous and they can decide what they want to read by themselves, rather than having scientists tell them what they are and are not interested in. Let's have one final question, can we? Okay, cool. Kaveh, do you want to... Are you going to be nice, Kaveh?
As nice as usual.
Dust us off.
Yeah, if I just briefly, if I can just go, I'm Kaveh from River Valley, if I can go back to the question about the language or jargon. Certainly we don't want to dumb down scientific language, and there are reasons for using that, but at the same time there's peer pressure to sort of speak in a pompous tone. Now, I'm in publishing now, many years ago as a physicist, and long ago that I can now admit to the questionable things I did when I'm publishing. So I discovered something, and I wrote it up, was about to send it off, and my colleague said, no, you can't, they won't publish that in optics letters or whatever journal. I said, well, why not? He said, well, there are no equations in it. I said, no, but that explains. He said, you don't need equations. He said, well, it's not going to get published. And I looked at the paper, and the journal, and sure enough, there's a couple of equations on each page, because it looks like, you know, a paper. So I dreamt up a couple of examples, for example, completely useless, but I shoved in 3 equations, and it was published. I think that's a very bad example of something that could be communicated without an equation. But I had to make it look like a paper.
All right, thanks, Kaveh, for that story of the olden days. So can I ask you all just to give it up for our panelists today for coming here on a Saturday? So come on.